Perfect. Okay, well, dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to today's panel discussion organized by the European Commission on reshoring PV manufacturing in Europe, challenges and opportunities in the European solar sector. My name is Jennifer Karle and I work for the European Commission, the Directorate General for the Internal Market, the Industry, SMEs and Entrepreneurship in the Unit for Net Zero Industries and Circular and Sustainable Products, and I will be the moderator of today's panel. And to give a bit of background to our discussion today, the resilience of our future energy systems will be measured by secure access to the technologies that will power those systems, notably solar PV. And to achieve and secure our decarbonization objectives, we need to deploy solar panels at scale, but we also need to build the underlying infrastructure and boost our manufacturing capacities over the entire value chain here in Europe. So to do so, the Commission has presented the Green Deal Industrial Plan last year, which enhances the competitiveness of the European net zero industries. And it's also accelerating the transition to climate neutrality. As part of the plan, we put forward the Critical Raw Materials Act for the upstream sector, which will ensure secure and abundant access to the raw materials that we need for our green and for our digital transition. And for the downstream sector, we also presented the Net Zero Industry Act. This act will help Europe build its industrial leadership in clean energy technologies. The Net Zero Industry Act sets the benchmark for the EU industries, including solar PV, to produce 40% of the EU deployment needs by 2030, and to meet a share of global production of 15% by 2040, which is approximately equivalent to 30 gigawatts of annual production capacity, the target that was endorsed by the European Solar PV Industry Alliance. As a key aspect of the Act, it also provides a regulatory framework to help facilitate the market access for European companies through applying ambitious non-price criteria and auctions and public procurement. And the regulation will also promote the development of net zero acceleration valleys with the objective to create clusters of net zero industrial activity and thereby contributing to the reindustrialization of certain regions. And now to complement this, we're also planning to put in place a series of initiatives to create markets for sustainable net zero products in Europe. So the Commission plans to adopt eco-design and energy labeling rules for PV modules and inverters. These measures will set requirements on the efficiency, the durability, the repairability, as well as the recyclability of photovoltaic products to ensure that the devices deployed in Europe are environmentally sustainable. And we also want to put an end to importing and marketing products made with exploitation. And so we have put forward rules that ban products made with forced labor on the EU market. So whilst we have this solid framework of legislative initiatives in place to support the industry in the long term, we also see that now the industry currently is grappling with the challenges of a panel oversupply, as notably Chinese PV companies are ramping up production capacities much faster than the market can develop. So last year, a global oversupply of panels led to a price decrease of over 40%. And so we have intensified our efforts on European level to bolster our manufacturing sector amidst these challenges. And last week at the Informal Energy Council meeting in Brussels, European ministers, Commission and industry have come together to sign a solar charter. This charter sets out immediate actions for all the signatories. So it's important that the Commission, the Member States and the industry all work together for a strong European supply chain and thereby ensure a resilient and secure energy system. So against this background, I am very excited to hear today from the panelists and to hear about the views on how to reshore solar manufacturing in Europe. I'm pleased to introduce from Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy Systems, we have Dr. Sebastian Nold, Head of Team Techno-Economic and Ecological Analysis. From Next Wave, we have Dr. Frank Siebke, Senior Vice President, Strategic Business Development. Then we have from Solar Materials, Fridolin Franke, the Managing Director. And we have from SolarWatt, Dr. Armin Freudsheim, the Managing Director and CTO. So, to start off the discussion, in the course of the challenges faced already last year, we nearly lost our ingots and wafer manufacturing in Europe, with Norwegian Crystals filing for bankruptcy and Norsun announcing a temporary production stop. Dr. Nold, you and your team have recently published, under the European Solar Industry Alliance, a study on an in-depth look at the ingot and wafer supply chain. Could you tell us the main takeaways from the study about reshoring ingot and wafer supply chain in Europe?
Thank you very much for inviting us. So the mapping of the ingot wafer supply chain has been a challenging and complex task. And I give much credit to Oscar, as member of my team, who did the main work in his master thesis. Because the ingot and wafer supply chain is situated 99% in China and Southeast Asia nowadays. You just said it, that in Europe there's almost no manufacturing left or halt of production. So, and also all the back supply chain also is situated in China or Southeast Asia. So it's not only the manufacturing, it's also the supply chain behind. So when we're talking of manufacturing, we need a lot of crystallizer pullers and wafer sawing equipment. This is the key equipment in manufacturing, which formerly also was developed in Europe, but now there's no manufacturer outside China left who could supply competitive production equipment. So even the equipment manufacturing moved to China. So, and if you don't, you have to buy up-to-date equipment from there. The same is then also for the materials in the supply chain. So you need, for example, the crucibles for growing the ingots. So these are also then almost exclusively manufactured in China. On this side, there's a positive sign. They also get a high purity quartzite from outside China. So there are sources in the US and they're then processed in the EU. So there are only few locations in the world to get this quartz. So there also is a little dependency, but also for the other materials, sawing wire for sawing the wafers, or for the CZ pullers, the hot zones made of specific graphite components. This is all not existing anymore in Europe, and this is then a big challenge for setting up manufacturing. So nowadays, if you want to build, you have to source all the equipment from China. You have to get all the materials also from these regions, and it's almost exclusively available in China. There are also some positive signs. The knowledge in Europe is still there. So we have researchers, we have still from these companies, people who know how to manufacture wafers and how to build this equipment. There are some of them we also interviewed who want to restart production, restart manufacturing of wafers, but also restart manufacturing of equipment. But this is a big challenge, and that's not done in a few months. So this takes really a long run. First, we need manufacturing. For manufacturing, the supply chain can be built downwards. So it's a big and challenging task. And here, the domination of China or Chinese companies in Southeast Asia is close to 100% along the whole PV value chain.
Well, thank you for giving this overview of the state of play in the production capacities in Europe, which definitely have seen better times. But you're sitting next to Dr. Siebke and staying with the wafer production in Europe. You are planning to produce innovative wafers in Europe. Could you share how you're planning to establish a wafer production in Europe?
Yes, sure. So we are commercializing an innovative direct gas to wafer technology. So instead of taking chlorosilane, making polysilicon, melting it, making ingots, bricking it, and putting it on a wire saw and cutting wafers out of the bricks, we directly go from the chlorosilane to wafer. So we do that by growing a clone of a wafer from a mixture of chlorosilane and hydrogen. And by doing so, we can reduce energy consumption by up to 60% as well as CO2 emissions. And we can reduce silicon waste from 30 to 5%.
Can you hold the mic?
And this enables us to compete on a global market. So we started construction of our first factory with 250 megawatt capacity in Bitterfeld, Germany. Bitterfeld is for us an ideal location because we were able to acquire a chemical plant for vent gas recycling, which was part of a former polysilicon plant. we can get supply of chlorosilane and hydrogen by pipeline, and we can also sell back the byproduct, very pure HCl gas. And in Bitterfeld, we could expand to 3 to 4 gigawatt without major investments in the chemical infrastructure, if the right framework is given. And that's where my concerns start, because there are two, I think, major factors which could lead to a negative investment decision. First of all, we need a stable customer base. As a European wafer manufacturer, we would like to have European solar cell manufacturers. And in the current environment, our potential customers face a very difficult situation. So they struggle to survive. And the European Commission, as well as the member states, have to take fast actions, really fast actions, to ensure that the existing or remaining players survive and that new players are able to raise funds to rebuild the European PV industry. The second factor I see is energy prices. So today, more than 98% of the wafers come from China or Southeast Asia, where energy prices are low. So even if we save 60% of the energy, it's difficult to compete if the energy prices in Germany are more than 3 times higher than in China. So there, action has to be taken. And the politics have to create a levelized playing field. The US has shown how to do that. So the measures taken there most likely do not apply or cannot be copied to Europe. But there are other ideas like resilience auctions, resilience bonus, which can create a levelized playing field, helps the industry to survive, and help all the players to create viable business plans for the future. And I think fast action has to be taken to get this done.
You mentioned the existence of cell manufacturers in Europe and subsequently also module manufacturers. So moving ahead in the supply chain, we have Dr. Freudsheim here from SolarWatt. And SolarWatt is active in the module manufacturing in Germany already today. But the market is challenging at the moment, as we've just heard. I would like to hear what is your perception as regards solar module manufacturing in Europe and also the future of SolarWatt. And before I give you the word, also to mention that Dr. Freudsheim has a train to catch right after the panel. So he might have to leave us a few minutes before the end.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to tell you about the situation of PV module manufacturers in Europe. And I think we face the same problem as all the other module manufacturers in Europe. So we are challenged by these high dumping prices from these China modules. And the main issue is that these low prices, so let's say 10 cents per watt peak, and we need to sell for 30 cents per watt peak, they are not given. They are not given to the end customer. The end customer always pays 50 cents or something like that per watt peak, and the margin is taken by some big installers. There are a few installers who want to cooperate with European producers, but the end customer, if he buys a system, he pays round about 20,000 euros, and if he buys it with German modules or European modules, it might be 21,000 euros. So that is an investment for 30 years. Nobody cares about these 1,000 euros, but the installer who installs one installation per day, he takes 3,000 to 4,000 euros per installation, plus if he installs Chinese modules. And this is per day. You can multiply 4 by 5 days, it's 20,000 euros per week, times 4, it's 80,000 euros per month. And that is our issue, that the installers, or not all of the installers, but some very aggressive installers are very much against a transparency, where are the margins. And one of them, I just like to mention them, it's NPAL and it's 1,5. They are very aggressive because they want to go for an IPO by the next year. And NPAL, for example, the head of marketing from NPAL has changed from the Minister of Christian Lindner. He was in the bureau, the head of leading Christian Lindner's bureau by June last year, and then he moved to NPAL. And if you look at the arguments from FDP, you see directly it's exactly the arguments from NPAL, and similar arguments you find by 1.5. And so this is so disgusting that you cannot believe that. But it's true, you can check it by yourself, that is really true. And we had to leave off 85 people at SolarWatt because we cannot compete with these prices, and it is completely unfair, this regulation. And I personally re-entered in the solar business. I stepped out because since 1999 I was in this business, and I stepped out to have, I call it sabbatical, in the semiconductor industry, and thought 2020 there is a good chance after Fridays for Future there will be a re-establishment of PV in Europe. And I see really the EU is fighting for that, and I see really positive signs like the Net Zero Industrial Act and all this kind of stuff. But finally it has to be executed by the countries. And the countries, at least in Germany, they do not act, and that is really a severe issue for us as producers. We have some ideas to continue, but the production is on risk. And that is, we have also ideas to work on that with special products. But if you think about 30 gigawatts which you want to install, you cannot run special products with 30 gigawatt scale. So you need really action, and the action is now. And we tell this action not only since yesterday. Since I am back in this business, since 2020, we continuously discuss with ministries that there needs to be some support because of very different reasons, and that is so frustrating that the policy is, especially in Germany, is not acting accordingly.
Well, thank you very much for this wake-up call to the German ministries, and of course we also hope that the Net Zero Industry Act will, as soon as it enters into force, which is currently expected for end of June, July, and then some of the access to markets provisions, including sustainability and resilience criteria, will already start applying in auctions and public procurement. So of course we hope that this will translate on the member state level as well. And now, Mr. Franke, looking at the end of life of a solar panel. Solar panels' lifespans are more or less 25 to 30 years, and soon the first generation of modules will reach the recycling stage, where solar materials comes into play. And meeting the material demand will also be a key challenge to achieve the low carbon energy transition. How can you contribute to accessing further key raw materials once the first generation of panels reach their end of life?
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think.
Is it on? Yeah, okay, now it's on. So thanks a lot for the invitation. So we think solar energy must include solar panel recycling when we are really talking about clean solar energy. And also the recycling of the solar panels can really contribute to the two main drivers of the energy transition. So the one thing is that we want to achieve net zero. When you use secondary raw materials from recycling, then you can dramatically reduce the energy consumption, and by that also then the CO2 footprint. So this is a second topic compared to changing the production processes like NextWave is doing, how we can improve. And the second really big thing is that we want to stop to be so dependent on, for example, Russia, on the fossil fuels of gas and oil. And what we now do is, what we heard before from you, from Fraunhofer, is that we shift to a dependency on China, because all of the value chain is in China at the moment. So if we really want to get independent, recycling is a key pillar, because the resources or the raw materials are not mined in Europe anymore. And we have the raw materials here already in Europe, and we should recycle them and bring them into new products. So for us, of course, it would be great to bring these materials back into the solar industry. But yeah, since the industry is not that developed at the moment, we focus also on other similar high application products for our materials. Yeah, in the long term, we focus also on the solar industry, but also the numbers for the recycling must increase first. So, for example, to really bring back the silicon into the solar industry, we need around 4,000 tons per year. So this means we have to recycle around 100,000 tons of solar panels. So this will take a while, but yeah, we see the numbers rising. So you mentioned the lifetime of 25 to 30 years, but what we achieve are not just the real end-of-life panels, but also panels which have some production failures, so that they already reach an early end-of-life after 10 years, 14 years, because of backsheet errors, for example. But also installment failures, so like 1 to 2% of all panels that are installed break while the installment process, so this also one stream. And then also like bad weather events like hailstorms, so this also like the third big stream of panels that reach our facility. And what we face at the moment is we have now our pilot line in place with up to 3,000 tons of capacity, but yeah, it's now we are already booked out for the whole year and are now building our first industrial size recycling plant. But for us, it's more like a race against the need or the demand on recycling capacities, and that we have to build the recycling capacity at the same time.
Yeah, wow. Thank you very much for explaining how the Solar Materials is planning to secure the access again to raw materials. And this is of course also looking at the Critical Raw Materials Act that we presented last year, and great to hear how that is already advancing. You're already booked out for the year. Going back a bit to the wafer production, Dr. Siebke, as a startup, I would also like to hear a bit more about your views on accessing financing. And could you share with us how your experience is with securing financing and ensuring the viability of projects aimed at expanding manufacturers' facilities?
Well, today it's a very challenging environment. So, as I explained, we are commercializing an innovative technology which offers significant advantage compared to the traditional way of doing wafers. So material savings, energy savings. But still, with the first factory, there is risk related. And we experience that market participants are not risk takers in the current uncertain geopolitical environment. And so we're pursuing our 150 million Series D financing round right now, of which about 90 million will be allocated for the first factory in Bitterfeld. And we opted for full equity financing because we do not yet have access to project or debt financing. And there are no governmental schemes in place to help us to become bankable. The TCTF 86 initiative of the German government last year was a step in the right direction. So everybody got excited about it, enthusiastic, but now we face delays, and this is very disappointing. And besides CapEx support, I think the industry, the PV industry, not only us, need OpEx support as proposed by the European Solar Industry Alliance to grow to a scale where the PV manufacturers can compete on an international scale. And it's puzzling to me that there's such a lack of support for PV manufacturing in Europe. Because in the past, and I think also in the future, access to clean and cheap energy was and will be a key factor for creating wealth and prosperity in a region. So, and I think we cannot rely on third countries' technology. Europe must have access to the latest production technology and know how to operate it to maintain competitive as a production site. So today's lack of protective measures, I think, will lead to the death of the PV manufacturing industry very soon if no counteraction is taken. There's no protection against dumping. There's no protection against products produced by forced labor. And this is a serious problem, and action has to be taken fast.
Yeah, and the forced labor regulation that was agreed by the co-legislators in March this year, but it will still take around 18 months until it enters into force.
I don't think that many companies are able to survive 18 months today.
But speaking of short-term measures, so I mentioned the Solar Charter at the beginning, which was signed last week by the ministers, by the Commission, also by industry. And Dr. Freudsheim himself was there last week with the ministers and the Commissioner. And one of the actions that's in the Charter is that some of the provisions of the Net Zero Industry Act, notably on including non-price criteria in auctions and procurements, are quickly implemented by the member states. And another of the commitments signed by off-takers was also that they commit to incorporate resilience and sustainability criteria also in their strategies, also through collaborating with manufacturers. And you mentioned also earlier that maybe securing off-takers is a bit challenging at the moment. So I would like to hear a perspective on the Charter, of course, and also on your views on how it is to find off-takers and what else can be done to further support.
So we have been, as Solarbad has been very honored because we also signed this charter with all, and that was really new, that all the, not really all, but 23 member states also signed. It was not only Commission, but also the member states signed. And surprisingly enough, Germany signed as well. And so I was really happy about that. Talked later to Sven Giegold, who was the representative for Minister Habeck. But the pity is, so that was very honorable, because I think it's getting through the roots now. But this is time consuming, and exactly time is not what we have. So I always say time is not so much. An Italian friend of mine says always, and this is still critical. But we see it going down and developing, but it's really a pity. We see France is doing something like resilience bonuses. Also Italy is implementing something mostly very special to their own economy. But Germany is not, because we have the three parties who is not so much too able to do anything by that time. And I really see this very, very critical, not only for the PV industry, but also for the industry as a whole. And that is why I'm really worried. PV is just the very first mover who is about to lose. And I talk to so many people meantime, and everybody is worried, not only PV industry. And I think this should be realized by the politics. But politics, I really write, I would say, every other day an email to Mr. Habeck, to Mr. Scholz, to Carsten Schneider, to who else? I really quite every other day, or I let my assistant write to follow up every day, because we want to speak to them. But it is a closed shop. For FDP, you do not have any chance to talk to them. And I do not know what from there, they are elected from the people, but they do not talk to the people. And that is what I really completely upset. And I think this, so there's a political statement, and I don't do it right now, but I'm really upset. And there are chances, and the Net Zero Industrial Act is a good measure, and also the Solar Charter has some good signs, but again, they need to be implemented by the countries. And if they are not implemented, then nothing. It's always only warm words, and this is not what helps the industry.
Yeah, so implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act provisions on the one hand, but also bringing together the manufacturers and the off-takers. And this is what we are trying to do in the European Solar Industry Alliance. And most of the panelists are also members here of the alliance. So even in future, we want to continue bridging this gap between the manufacturers and the off-takers. So speaking of the Net Zero Industry Act, another of the provision of the Act introduces this concept of net zero acceleration valleys. And Saxony-Anhalt already has an accumulation of solar companies. And Mr. Franke, Solar Materials is a startup from Saxony-Anhalt. And I would like to hear from your perspective, are you already benefiting from this kind of cluster? And how do you see this concept of these valleys in future?
Yeah, so to be honest, we're not really in so a well environment for our off-takers, for example. So what's interesting for us is input side, so bigger solar park operators, and output side, who takes our materials. Since the industry is not really there, and we're not so much focused on Saxony-Anhalt, but for example, bigger of a wider range. But what we see more is, for example, on a scientific level, that we can cooperate with the Fraunhofer CSP, so Center for Silicon Photovoltaics, for research projects, and also other universities. So in the long term, it would be great to really create more of an environment there, and we also plan to do it with the solar cluster. I'm not so sure about the correct name, but you will also be part of it. Hopefully more will happen in the future.
Yeah, we definitely hope so too. So to really create these regions where companies working on the same technologies, but also research institutions, as you're saying. And turning to Dr. Nold, so against the background of this discussion and the views of the industry, there might be also some new ideas arising for research projects. And do you already have new research priorities after conducting the study on the wafers and ingots? Is there more planned on the solar industry? And also what are other main points you would maybe like to share beyond your study that you would like to tell the audience about reshoring the industry?
Yeah, well, of course, we always try and be in the forefront of technology development. And so now we're looking, of course, or have been looking for years more into tandem photovoltaics and even triple junction photovoltaics, perovskite technology, scaling up perovskite technology. Also looking into then model of integration of these technology. We're looking much more, and have been, especially in my team, into environmental assessment of the technologies. Technology transfer is also important for us, especially now where more and more opting for manufacturing outside of China. So we see a strong commitment, of course, in the US through the Inflation Reduction Act. You see then also that in India, the industry is growing, and then of course we're trying also to share our expertise. We'd like to do this much more in Europe, much more in Germany, but this is a very difficult environment. And I would like to add that, especially in Germany, but in Europe, to understand that PV is a high-tech technology, and that it is has the lowest electricity production cost of the technologies out there at good locations. So it will be the main pillar of our future energy system with the lowest CO2 footprint. So we need to have the full environment from sourcing the materials, production, the value chain behind, but also recycling in the end to put it into the cycle. There's a lot of potential, I think, also into recycling. So I think the Net Zero Industry Act, there are a lot are hoping for it. And also then additional measures. I think the Forced Labor Act, but it needs to be fast. It needs to be quicker than now anticipated. And there are also some hopes of also in this eco-design and energy labeling rule, but I have to put a but, unfortunately, even though I'm sitting on a panel of the EU, especially with the eco-design draft, it is in this current situation, it is also has high potential for greenwashing from imported modules, also from China. And I have to explicitly note that, and the industry was warning a lot and was warning repeatedly for a lot longer time. So there needs to be also some action taken to adapt this eco-design directive as it's currently in place. This is really, really important. Otherwise, if you set out CO2 measures and rules, and this can be undermined in the current methodology. And we have analyzed this and also published research paper of this in depth. So there's also a risk that also this can get undermined then through the installers importing high carbon modules. So there needs to be further action taken on this.
Yeah, thank you for this views also towards the Commission. I will take that back as my colleagues are working on the eco-design energy labeling rules. And that is currently still being developed. So, yeah. Yeah, and I think we have now a bit of time also to take some questions maybe from the audience. So if anybody would like to come in to the debate, share some views or ask a question.
Good.
Yeah.
It's working, yeah. Okay. I thought it was a very interesting topic and the collection of experts. Thank you for the topic. I was thinking about what you were saying. If couldn't we produce the solar panels with renewables, say that we wouldn't have that problem of the CO2 footprint or the penalization for the CO2. That's for you. For you, I was thinking, shouldn't we have as a strategical investment in the European Union at least a kind of, even if it's small industry or even manufacture in China if necessary, but to what extent is feasible to depend on China when any geopolitical conflict, it can put us into having to pay back the sanctions and maybe getting cut off of PV, no? So what are we going to do? Say, in Spain we have now price of electricity is negative, or in Italy it's really skyrocketing. Is the opportunity for the hydrogen and the rest, but if the solar goes down, it would be a disaster. Yeah? For you, I had this question about recycling. I've got solar panels from 25 years ago, and they were made by a Spanish company with Isophoton, but the panels themselves, they were German. They were 100 watts each, and they're still working perfectly all right. So I don't know exactly how the recycling business, when you got an installation, it's still working perfectly okay after 25 years. I mean, to a certain extent, now for 45 euros, you can have 450 watts. So in that case, the cost of the 100 watts, it was 600 euros of 2000, no? So really, really expensive in comparison. So I was a little bit shocked to hear this kind of grim picture that you were putting, because I thought we were really heading into the really off-taking of the not only renewables, but in general with hydrogen and everything else. So, and I understand the problems with the dumping, no, that you were talking about. But cannot we do something about that? Sort of like manufacture in China, maybe, or make a kind of like deal with them or something?
I just want to say I didn't get it completely, but I'm 100% sure that Europe as joint research institutes, joint producers, joint machine suppliers are capable to compete with China if it's on a level playing field. I'm 100% sure about that. So there is these, for example, this perovskite which was talked about, the next wave, and the real good ideas. I have here a little, you can see here, we are the good ones. In Germany, in Europe, everything has been developed. Our shit is not stinking. So here you can see, we really think we have the chances if we pull joint forces together. And that is, I'm 100% sure about it. But Europe needs to be joined. And also it has to go down from top to the bottom. And that is where is China much better than us. They just have their plan and they execute. And but we are really the more innovative ones. They have done the automation, that is right, and brought costs dramatically down. But if you look at all these technologies, PERC technologies, tandem technology, heterojunction technology, it's not from China. It is from Japan, or it's from Europe or United States. It is not from China.
Yeah, and I think with all the policy measures as well, we always have to take into account, of course, the deployment and the manufacturing, and always weigh that off, because the deployment, the fast deployment, is a key priority as well to really have clean energy. But the dependencies that we are building are definitely, now being quite, the red flags are being visible everywhere. So this is what we're working on. I think we can take another quick question if you, we have 2 more questions. Okay. Yeah, I think, let's take them both and then wrap up.
Thank you. Could you please share your opinions on next generation technologies such as perovskites or even the 3-5 group semiconductors as a chance for reshoring manufacturing?
So can I say, because we want to do the industrialization. That is a very critical step to industrialize these technologies. It is proven, the perovskite tandems, that they, from ISE Fraunhofer, they have 25%, and you pass with this the Jockli-Queisser limit, because you have a 2-junction cell, and then the limit is open. It's reopened above 30%, and this is a high chance. You have challenges for a long time, but you have to overcome with this, and I'm sure in 3 years, 4 years from now, this will be the next big change. But to realize that, you need to keep alive the existing production value chains. If this is now dying, so for example, our owner is a heavy industry man. So if they step out, it's such a bad sign. I have been working for Bosch in 2013, and when Bosch Solar Energy stepped out, all the industry stepped out, and then it is really hard to recover.
Did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, maybe
briefly?
just a short to add. I mean, perovskite will be the next technology, but it's not that we own it or so. So also all around the world, large Chinese manufacturers are working up. They have huge research departments also working on that technology. So it will not be a game changer who bring back PV to Europe. So we have to have PV manufacturing. We need to have also the silicon supply chain, because the silicon wafer below the perovskite cell is also very important in the end for protecting the cell, especially in terms of if you have reverse electricity flowing. So you could get shunts if you don't have the cell up there. But there still is some research going on. But I can only repeat what Armin said. We need to have manufacturing here, and we need to have the right legislation also in place, and we have high hopes in the EU on also countries that there are right measures they are on the way, but they need to be implemented right, and the industry needs to be heard here.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we have time for another brief question, and then we need to wrap up slowly.
I can be short. Thank you very much. Really interesting to hear, and I think it's great that you have such a great representative of different stakeholders of the value chain. My question would be, you mentioned that you are considering to introduce non-price criteria. So which non-price criteria would actually help you to keep the industry here in Europe? So for every single one here along the value chain, what would help you as a specific non-price criteria?
Very good question. So I think one part is, of course, that we have a significant advantage in our electricity mix, which is much lower in CO2. And this is already discussed, that the CO2 can give a significant advantage, that we have lower CO2 emissions in manufacturing. You understand a lot of the silicon manufacturing is happening in northern China or in the Xinjiang region. Beside the forced labor, they are purely made from coal. So, and as long as there are no measures taken that we can use this advantage also in this non-pricing criteria to install low CO2 footprint modules. I think can be an important step, of course, not accepting forced labor at all, and really also checking that, not just having it on paper, but really at the customs, checking what's coming into the Europe, I think is also very important. I think it's also important to having in Europe a market segment which is growing for domestic products, that really investors and can plan with a growing market segment for the EU. And frankly, they have to learn manufacturing again at large scale. We know the technology, but going to 5-10 gigawatt factories, these have never been in Europe. We know how to do it. It's not that but they need some time. They need some time ramping up these factories and scaling. So there needs to be also a certain amount of time to being able to scale. And then I think PV manufacturing in Europe can get very close to manufacturing of PV modules. In China, we have done many analyses for many years on cost, so we know pretty much the cost of the equipment from all around the world and how it's manufactured. If a PV module is 20% more expensive manufactured in Europe, the impact of the electricity cost in the end is maybe 0.1, 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour. 0.1, 0.2. I mean, maybe maximum 0.5 to 1 at the beginning, the first couple years. And yeah, that's too high of the price to pay in the current market situation for the installers. Yeah. But hopefully not for the end market. Yeah.
Great, yeah. I mean, happy to talk more about the Net Zero Industry Act also maybe after the panel and the non-price criteria that are in the Act, but I think we really have to close. So maybe just in one word or two words to wrap up from your side, what would be the main element in your view to succeed with the reshoring of the PV industry in Europe?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand or to accept that it's more like a geopolitical war about who's in control of the energy in the future. And China has now already, or is already 10 years ahead or 12 years ahead, and we really have to make huge investments, so multi-billion dollars or 100 billions of dollars to really keep up and to get back the control of our own energy system, because as you mentioned, when they don't supply us anymore with solar panels, then it's done. When we don't have the machines anymore, the machine equipment manufacturers, then it's also done. So we have to start now, otherwise it's, the chance is gone.
Great. Dr. Siebke, what's your main takeaway for us today?
Well, as I said, we are willing to support, we're ideally positioned and willing to support the reshoring of the European PV industry, but it needs the right framework conditions. And to create them, we have to create a market segment for European manufacturing, for domestic manufacturing, by non-pricing criteria, resilience bonus, and resilience auctions. But we also have to give early stage company access to financing, capex support, and opex support, as well as low energy prices to be successful. And if we create a bundle of these measures, then we can bring back manufacturing. I'm convinced of that. We can be competitive.
Okay, thank you. Last but not
I
least.
think you summed it up nicely. I don't want to repeat it again, but I think I have to say we need to have a strong commitment from politics and action and fast.
Perfect.
Thank you.
A lot to take back to Brussels, and I hope also for the audience. So thank you very much for coming today to the panel.